So today I'm going to be taking a look at a pretty cool microbrand called Bremoir. They're basically releasing their first watch. It's a little bit dressier, which is what I dig, so let's take a look at it. We have a diameter of 39 millimeters, lug to lug of 48.5, height of 10.9, and a lug width of 20 millimeters. Some other general specifications for this watch: through the open case back, we're going to see we have the STP 111 movement in here. It is a no date based movement, but this being the prototype does actually have a ghost date wheel, which will be rectified in the full production model. It is a pretty interesting movement that not a lot of companies use. I know Zodiac uses them, but it's nice to see some microbrands taking advantage of the movement. We have a sapphire crystal on the front and the back of the watch as well. We have 50 meters of stated water resistance with a regular push-pull crown. And I believe all these green accents on the face of the dial are all C3 applied lume. And last but not least, direct from Bremoir, this watch retails for $985. Looking at the dial, it is very Art Deco, very well executed, and let's just take a look at it. We have the 12, 3, 6, and 9 numerals there. Alternating between those numerals, we have just kind of regular rectangular markers, which are actually double faceted, which look really nice. They play with the light nicely. Outside of all these markers, we have these kind of triangular metal indices surrounded by a triangular like lume base, which I think looks really cool. And then on the seconds track, between all those markers are actually these kind of square-ish looking minute markers that are meant to represent the actual door of the Chrysler building that this watch is based off of. Baton style handset here that's double faceted, and it nicely ties into the double faceted markers on the outside track of the watch. The dial itself also gives off a pseudo sector feel because we have this more brushed metallic ring in white here, and then the black surround on the inside and the outside. I think it looks cool. I think it just gives a little bit of interest and flair to the watch itself, and I dig it. They kept the text very minimal on this watch, I would say, just Bremoir for the logo there at the top. Interesting how the M is kind of bigger than all the other letters, and the M is very Art Deco in its inspiration. I think it looks cool. It obviously fits the theme itself. Lexington, which is the model name right below that, and self-winding kind of in the little classic smile style there at the very bottom. Not too much text, very clean without a date, classic dial, classic layout, and a lot of small hints of inspirations that really come out not only under macro but just on closer inspection. And I think it's one of those watches where you own it for a while and you just find more things about it over time that interest you more and more. So zooming in on this dial, we get a little bit of detail that we couldn't necessarily see from immediate wrist inspection. One thing I will note again is this is a pre-production model, so there might be a little bit less QC going into this watch than could be expected for the final production run. Just paying a quick attention to the outside seconds track, again you have those pseudo square markers that are meant to look like the door on the Chrysler building. Very interesting shape to them. I think they look cool, a little bit more just unique than a classic circular pip or square pip, and obviously that little hint of inspiration is cool too. Each of the minute markers done in this rectangular / pyramidal shape are really cool because again they are double faceted along the sides there, but once you actually get to the kind of the triangular top, it has the classic double facet on each side, but as you can see it almost meets the rectangular body, and I don't know if it is all one solid piece or it's two separate pieces, which I think is probably more likely. But even then, what's nice is it does look like one solid piece when you're up this close, but when you kind of hold it a little bit farther away, you get that real separation between the two pieces, even though they are one holistic piece. And as you can see, when one part lights up, another part goes dark. So they are really nicely faceted and are just really nicely done. One little detail I didn't notice until I really got this close up is the black elements of the dial have this somewhat canvas fabric type effect to them. They don't have a classic inky blackness. They don't have a even traditional looking dial finishing. It's a process and subtle texture I really haven't seen before, and I think up close it looks really cool. Looking at the hands, they are pretty roughly finished. Again, I'm going to chalk this up to being a pre-production model. I think the general shape of the hands and just the facets and the way they catch the light look great. The lumen fill is applied really nicely and really evenly, but again they are very rough, not the best looking. Same goes for the markers. There's a lot of dust. And while there is a little bit of excess dust and debris within the watch, I think the base elements are done really nicely, like this triangular Lume signature is done really well. Overall, this nice brush minutes track looks really nice, gives a nice breakup between the dial layers, is nicely outlined in the darker black on each side. A little bit of the track actually missing right there, as you can see. But again, I think the full production models are going to be a lot better finished, but it is something to keep in mind that this one is not the best. So moving on to the case of this watch, and I think this is another really interesting point about it. It is not a traditional oyster reminiscent case style. It isn't a traditional circle with lugs. It is very much its own unique thing, and I think that's really cool. Looking at the case more generally, we have this very, I guess you can consider it flat design. The whole top portion of this case is vertically brushed. There's a very strong kind of H symmetry inside the lugs here. We do have this very nice, sweeping, beautiful chamfer along the side of the lug and along the side of the case, really, that thins out really nicely towards the crown and widens up all the way alongside the lug. It's a really interesting touch. I haven't seen a chamfer really widen out and narrow as much as this one does, so it looks really cool. Looking at the side of the case, I can say we have a pretty nice curvature to the actual mid case itself. It doesn't even look too thick from this angle, so there is a really nice case construction going on here. We do have a completely vertical brushing on the lug sides as well. The crown, I think, too, is pretty well finished. We have this very circular inner crown that raises up a little bit, this kind of blasted area, and then another high polished area. That holds basically the knurling of the watch. Crown is done very well here. It's not in the way by any means. There's a good grip to it, easy to wind. One of my favorite aspects of this watch is the three-tiered or the stepped bezel here. Again, this is very Art Deco reminiscent. It feels a lot like the lines in a JLC Reverso. It has that flair about it. It just adds a certain visual interest to the watch that I think, had it not been there, it wouldn't have felt quite right. And I just think it looks cool. There's not a lot of companies that do stepped bezels like this, and whenever they do, I really do welcome it because it's not only a breath of fresh air, but I think it just looks killer. It leads up to the dial very nicely. It gives you just something that I think looks amazing. I think the step bezel is done amazingly well. I mean, each layer is actually very defined. It kind of clicks out in a way. Very much smallest at top, and then each layer gets wider and wider at its base until eventually actually meeting the case itself. Very well executed. And then flipping it over, we just get some general information. The time worth remembering little motto that Bremoir is going with, a nice customized rotor in black and gold, very much Art Deco luxurious feel about it, and a fairly nicely decorated STP movement. So moving on to how the watch wears on wrist, earlier I was wearing this Formex here, and here we have the Bremoir on my 6.5 inch wrist. As you can see, it does definitely sit within the bounds of my wrist pretty nicely. Although the strict dimensions say it is a 39mm, it is not a traditional circular case, so it's going to wear a little bit bigger than that. It definitely wears akin to a 40, if not a little bit larger, but because the lugs are fairly short, it doesn't wear huge on the wrist by any means. What I really like is, even though it isn't the slimmest watch ever, it does curve really nicely. It does sit on the wrist very well. It is comfortable. There's no digging from any sharp corners or anything like that, which I'm surprised by because it is a little bit more of an untraditional case shape, and it's possible that the machining couldn't have been that great, but thankfully it is here. One thing I did forget to mention is this is the stock strap that comes with the watch. It is fairly high quality, it's pretty comfortable, it breaks in nicely, and it does also have a nice stepped bezel which mirrors really perfectly with the bezel. And looking at the watch from a side view there, as you can see, again, plants very, very nicely onto the wrist, conforms really well. Any flexion is just met with the watch going deeper into the wrist. So it does sit well, it doesn't sit high by any means, it is comfortable, and I think it looks pretty good overall. It is very different, and I like that. Trying on some other straps, playing into a more casual feel, we have this nice Colareb strap. The colors, I think, pair slightly with the green accents there, and I think just complement the watch. One thing I will note about wearing this watch is at times the case can feel a little bit chunky and almost at odds with the dial itself. It's very refined dial. It's a very much an Art Deco, classy, almost dressy dial with a almost sporty very chunky case that almost feels more reminiscent of like a 70s sports watch. And I don't think that's bad by any means. It's a very much a combining of two different natures, two different styles that actually seem to work together fairly well, but at times it does seem a little odd, and maybe that won't be for you. Here we have this nice brown calf skin from Delugs straps. One thing I will note again about the case is that it does, I think, look a little bit more awkward off wrist than it does on wrist. When I first saw this watch off wrist, I thought it looked a little too weird, but once I actually wore it, once I actually felt it on wrist, it kind of came together more and harmonized itself, and that's just something maybe you'll have to get over. If you love it already, it shouldn't be a problem for you. And there we go, the brown making the watch a little bit more casual, popping a little bit more against those colors than the more neutral suede-ish tannish gray did. Here we have this green Fluco suede strap. I think pairs really nicely with the subtle green accents left by the Lume. Looks great. The green Lume and the green strap pair well together. The black and the green pair well. I just think it's a fun strap, and Fluco makes some killer suede at the price. And lastly, the Arches silicone strap. Thankfully, because this does have the silver brush ring, it pairs a lot better with the white strap than had it not had that. Because usually when a watch uses like C3 Lume, it clashes a little bit with my white silicone straps, but this one I think still pairs fairly well. Very comfortable combo, very cool, funky case. Very interesting watch by Bremoir, not gonna lie. Something I didn't really expect to like much before seeing it in person, but after actually having it on wrist, looking at it, it's very unique, and I dig that. I'm assuming there's gonna be a little bit more Lume on the watch once the final actual production models come out, but that being said, it is still not that badly loomed. I think I am pretty surprised by how well the triangular Lume in the Ministrack actually comes out. They looked very small, very thin, but I think it has a very cool and unique Lume signature. It's very legible. The hands are a little bit brighter, but that happens a lot. Overall, decent job. Doesn't last very long, but again, I think this is more of a pre-production Lume application. Relooming and comparing to the Timex, obviously the Bremoir isn't badly loomed. It's still very legible, not quite as bright, both because the surface area isn't there and just the thickness isn't there either. But I still think Bremoir did a good job. For a dress watch, it has pretty good lume in general, and again, I think it looks cool, so not too shabby. So pros and cons of the watch, and the first pro for me is just going to be the shape of the watch in general. It is kind of a faux cushion, somewhat rectangular style case, and although off wrist it looks a little odd at times, on wrist it looks really cool, it fits really well, and it's undoubtedly unique, and that's not something easy to do. So my next pro is just going to be the detail on the watch, and more specifically the detail on the dial. You have those callback elements to the building that it's referencing. You have the bicolor effect of the pseudo tuxedo, pseudo sector dial. It's just a really fun watch to look at. It's one of those watches where the more you look, the more things you find. And it's nice that the brand didn't just go for a watch that was kind of people pleasing. They actually put, in essence, blood, sweat, and tears into it and actually made a design that may or may not have done well. And here I think it came together and was executed very well. And lastly, following on from the point that there's detail paid to this watch, I think what I really like is the stepped bezel. It is very prominently stepped. It's not a bezel that a lot of companies use anymore. And I think it just looks cool. It separates it from other watches in a watch box. And at the end of the day, I think it was executed well and it looks nice. So moving on to cons, and one of the first cons is also the case shape, and while it was a big pro for me, I think it can be a con for some people in the fact that it seems very chunky, and that was the initial impression I had as well. It is not necessarily a super svelte dress watch. It is a little bit more robust, a little bit sportier in a way, and again, I think on wrist it makes a lot more sense than it does off wrist. Another con I have with the watch is the use of the C3 Superluminova. The green lume tint just kind of ruins it for me. There shouldn't be any introduction of other colors, right? Especially when they have some of these more unique colorways, like I believe it's like a blue and kind of copper color. You don't need blue, copper, and hints of green with the lume. So it's unfortunate. I don't know why so many companies use this kind of lume, but I think it would have been a lot better with BGW9 or even no Lume at all. So final thoughts on this watch, and I think it is a really cool, fun offering. It's one of those things where this is what Microbrands are all about. They're bringing fresh designs, fresh colorways, just injecting new life into the watch industry, right? And Bremoir undoubtedly does that. It is not something I've ever seen before. It obviously pays tribute to things, not only just the building, but it is interesting, right? It has very unique colorways, which I haven't seen before. It has that stepped bezel. It has the unique case that I've never seen before. So it's nice to have something that at around $1,000 is almost wholly unique in a way. Is this watch the best value for money ever created? No, not at all. But I think if you like the design, if you're interested in the watch at all, if even one of the colorways speak to you, it's definitely a well-made watch. It will stand out compared to your other watches, and I think at the end of the day, if you had a couple watches side by side, there'd be a reason to wear this one. Look forward to hearing some thoughts on this watch. It's not super well known, but maybe that'll change over time because, to be fair, this is their first model. So thank you for watching. Hope you got something out of the video, and I'll see you in another one.